is an honor to introduce our next speaker, who's joining us today, FTC Commissioner Alvaro Bedoya. Commissioner Bedoya has been a commissioner since 2022 and has done some incredible work in research that encompasses all we've talked about today, helping us move closer to privacy legislation, AI research, strengthening consumer protection, and researching social media and teen mental health, just to name a few of the issues that the commissioner is addressing. And Commissioner Bedoya was also a founding director, or the founding director, of the Center for Privacy and Technology at Georgetown University Law Center, where he was also a visiting professor of law. And he's been influential in research and policy at the intersection of privacy and civil rights, and co-authored a 2016 report on the use of facial recognition by law enforcement and the risks that it poses to privacy, civil liberties, and civil rights. He was born in Peru, raised in upstate New York, always a good thing, in my opinion, and previously co-founded the Esperanza Education Fund and also served on the board of directors for the Hispanic Bar Association, one of our sister organizations. It is my great privilege to introduce FTC Commissioner Alvaro Bedoya. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Brett, for that introduction. It's wonderful to be here, not just for seeing some friends in the audience, but also because I think I've been emailing and talking to Alejandro off and on for like 2 years, and we've never met in person. So it's pretty great to be here in the flesh with all of you, sharing this time with you. So who am I? As Brett mentioned, I'm Alvaro Bedoya. I'm a commissioner at FTC. And actually, I think it's October 17th. And so this time of year is really special for me and my family because 36 years and 7 days ago, we landed at JFK Airport from Lima, Peru. And I was 5 years old. And now I have the honor, the great honor of being the second Latino to become a commissioner at the Federal Trade Commission in its 109-year history. And I feel that way, you know, and it's something that drives me. I have a short time with you today, so I just want to talk about one story on algorithmic bias because it sticks out to me for a few reasons. So this is a story about at Duke University that has to do with sepsis. So what is sepsis? It's when your body is suffering from an infection. It's fighting an infection, but it kind of is pushing too hard. It's starting to attack its own systems. It's a terrible condition. It actually affects about 1 million people plus each year, including 75,000 kids. And usually about 7,000 children die of sepsis every year. So it's really, really important to detect sepsis as soon as it sets in. But it's really, really hard to do that because the symptoms of sepsis are very similar to the symptoms of a common cold. So elevated heart rate, elevated temperature, a certain blood cell count. And so this is a struggle, a constant struggle for people in healthcare. And so a couple years ago, 2019, some researchers at Duke teamed up with some healthcare providers to try to solve or at least fight this problem. And how would they do that? And why am I telling you about it here? They wanted to use machine learning because there's lots of things machine learning is bad at, but one of the things it's good at is pattern recognition, right? Seeing patterns where people aren't good at seeing patterns. And so they said, why don't we train an algorithm on to detect sepsis? And what I want to stress to you is from the very beginning, the team said, we will make this a neutral algorithm. This will be a bias-free algorithm. We're going to go to any length to identify and root out that bias. So step one, they said, we're not going to use billing data. Okay, why? Because there's peer-reviewed research showing that if you assess health status by the amount of money you spend on healthcare, surprise, surprise, low-income folks end up with the short end of that stick because the systems think they're healthier when really no, they just didn't have as much money to pay those medical bills. I think that was published in Nature or Science. So the team said, no, we're going to actually have to go into the clinical data to train our system. Okay, and I'm confident there's a bunch of lawyers in this room, and I'm sure you know that clinical data, like billing data to a degree, but even more so, contains a lot of legally sensitive information. And it's coming off of multiple systems, not all of which are interoperational, but the team says, we got to do clinical data. And so they're developing the system, they're testing it this way and that, and they're about to launch it, and they're running it against all these measures to make sure they can see bias, identify it. It's looking great. They're about to roll it out. And then a researcher comes in and says, hold on a second. The data you train this on is showing Latino kids are getting diagnosed with sepsis 1 to 2 hours later than other kids. And why is that? Not because they're healthier. It's because, does anyone have any idea why it is? Anyone heard this story? Language. Who said language? Yes. Turns out it takes an hour or two to get an interpreter in this particular hospital. And so the diagnosis was coming down consistently 1 hour or two later. So right before they roll out the system, they realized it was trained on a data set that suggests that Latino kids are healthier than everyone else. They're coming down with sepsis an hour or two later than everyone else, when all it was is that they just didn't speak English comfortably enough to be able to communicate with their first responding physician, as it were. And of course, this team identified this. They fixed it before they rolled it out. But why am I sharing this story with you? 3 reasons. The first is these kinds of decisions will start to appear in the background all around us, and they already are happening today. Not just in the hospital, not just in healthcare, in hiring, firing, who gets the apartment, who gets the job, what wage they work for, etc. All the way down the line, all the capital letter decisions in our lives will be influenced by these systems. So these systems are pervasive and will be even more pervasive. Number 2, think about how hard it was to find this. This was an academic team whose mission at the outset, very rare, right? At the outset is we will find and root out bias. And they only caught this right before launch. Think of how many companies, how many healthcare providers do not have that mindset or those resources. And so this is extremely hard. And thirdly, think about how it is completely impossible for the kid lying in his hospital bed or her hospital bed to know what's going on. And so this idea that we need to put it on people to identify this problem and to complain, contest, right? These families in the hospital have no idea that these systems are running on the background, just as if you're subject to one of these systems in hiring, in firing, in housing, etc., you will likely have no idea it's occurring. And so what does that say to me? It says that it is on the private sector and it is on government to the extent we have authority to meet this problem and to try to address it. I personally think, as a matter of principle, our community should not be at a disadvantage when it goes online. And our people should not be at a disadvantage when critical decisions are made about them through machine learning. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you. I hope that we can continue this partnership. Already I've told HTTP to call me more. And thank you so much for your time. And thank you for all of you for the work you do. Thank you.
A lot has changed since 1964. Arnold Palmer no longer dominates golf. The Beatles will never again have 13 hit records at once. A gallon of gas doesn't cost 30 cents. And these days, families never gather around the black and white television to watch Sing Along with Mitch. If there's one thing that has stood the test of time since 1964, and that's SARE National. Originally called Operation SARE, SARE Jobs for Progress National, Inc., started in 1964 as a partnership between the American GI Forum, the League of United Latin American Citizens, the Department of the Navy, and the U.S. Department of Labor. President Lyndon B. Johnson thought Operation SARE was such a great idea that he included the program in his landmark War on Poverty legislation. And SARE opened its first center in Houston, Texas in 1965. Since its founding over 50 years ago, actually 60 years next year, SARE National has fulfilled the promise of transforming lives and communities through education, employment, and empowerment. Sierra Jobs for Progress is a national private nonprofit organization making a positive impact on families across America. Since its inception in 1964, Sierra has addressed the needs of economically challenged individuals in education, job skills, training, literacy, and employment. Sierra's ultimate goal is to assist individuals across the country and secure their success via education, training, employment, housing, and addressing other challenges. Headquartered in Irving, Texas, Sierra presently oversees an affiliate network of 35 community-based organizations in more than 200 cities in 26 states and Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. Through the extensive affiliate network, Sierra serves over 1.2 million individuals each year. Sierra programs touch the lives of preschool children, youth, high school dropouts, dislocated workers, unemployed individuals, and senior citizens, transforming their lives and communities. The digital world offers countless opportunities for education, employment, communications, and personal growth. We were honored this year to receive a grant from the FCC in its Affordable Connectivity Program outreach efforts. At Sierra National, we believe that digital inclusion is a cornerstone of equitable and thriving communities. By offering the Affordable Connectivity Program in partnership with the FCC, we are taking a significant step towards achieving this vision. From accessing educational resources to exploring job opportunities, our community can continue to take strides in closing the digital divide. We are also a proud partner with HTTP and its bilingual resource ACP Para Mí program. Sierra is just one of many community partners that collaborate with government agencies and industry to achieve digital equity for all communities. We are pleased to continue to highlight those partnerships and take a moment to tell the important stories of those who benefit from the ACP program. It's my pleasure at this time to introduce our next speaker, Elena Saltzman from Civic Nation. Elena?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Elena Saltzman. I'm the Director of Campaigns at Civic Nation. Thanks so much, Julian, for all of the work that y'all do and helping to get folks online, especially in collaboration with HTTP and ACP Para Mí. I'm excited to introduce our next panel on the future of digital equity, which will feature Alejandro Roark from the FCC, Mark Collin and Mara Reardon from NTIA, and moderated by Jisoo Song from the Department of Education's Office of EdTech. But first, I want to take a minute to talk about why this topic and these panelists' work are so important. As part of my work at Civic Nation, I help lead Online for All, a national campaign that we launched in partnership with the US Department of Education to help close the digital divide by focusing on internet access, affordability, and equity for students, families, and all Americans. Online for All launched in June of this year and kicked off with a national ACP Week of Action, where Civic Nation, HTTP, and over 370 other organizations joined forces to turbocharge a week of outreach and awareness about the Affordable Connectivity Program. As Julian just shared, this program has been so transformative for so many families and has helped over 21 million households save money on their internet bills so far. In a moment, we're going to share a video highlighting stories from 3 of these 21 million households. Earlier this year, Civic Nation worked with a few of our community-based partners to stand up new outreach programs to spread awareness and help people sign up for the ACP. These organizations were brand new to running digital equity and inclusion programs, but already knew firsthand the impacts of the digital divide in their communities. And we're thrilled to be able to share a few of their stories with you today. Whether it's enabling students to do their homework online at home, or helping families get a little more breathing room in their budgets, digital equity programs like the ACP have a profound impact on people's lives. And it's critical that we continue to share their stories to ensure that programs like ACP continue well into the future. If you're interested in hearing more from these storytellers after we show the video, you can go online. You can go to onlineforall.org/stories to see and share their individual stories. Thank you again to HTTP, to Julian, and everyone for having us here today, for your work through the ACP Para Mí program, and to the folks on this next panel for all the work that you do to shape the future of digital equity.
So good afternoon. Thank you to HTTP for inviting me to moderate this panel with esteemed colleagues from across the federal government. My name is Jisoo Song, serving as a digital equity advisor for the U.S. Department of Education's Office of EdTech. And my role is to essentially ensure that the Department of Education can be the best support agency that we can be to NTIA and FCC as they roll out all these great digital equity and inclusion programs. And they've been really great to work with. Alejandro, I know we were down in North Carolina last year to talk about the ACP. NTIA, I haven't worked with Mark and Mara before, but their team has been great supporters of our students as well. You can learn about OET's work on tech.ed.gov. And just for some brief background on the conversation for the next 45 minutes, we know that the bipartisan infrastructure law made a really historic investment to connect our communities. And we know laying out that physical infrastructure is going to be a necessary part of the solution, but that it's not going to be enough, right? There are households that require additional supports parallel to that physical infrastructure, from access to internet-enabled devices to opportunities to build digital skills. I know a panel before us talked about AI literacy as well. And our schools, libraries, and higher ed institutions, other anchor institutions have really led the way when it comes to those digital skill development efforts, especially during the pandemic. And we actually have published during the pandemic a digital equity guidance resource, which you can find on our website. We actually emphasize within that guidance resource this critical issue of adoption and the specific strategies that's needed, the human level strategies that are needed to solve those kinds of barriers. The folks over at HTTP also let me know that there are specific barriers faced by our Latino and Hispanic families, including the fear of government programs and services. Someone before us talked about the language accessibility barriers and the affordability of internet subscriptions, right? So we really can't take a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to closing the digital access divide. So with this background out of the way, I'll ask our speakers to introduce themselves briefly, who they are, what they do, what their day-to-day looks like. So Marco, I'll start with you.
Sure. Okay. Hello, everybody. This is such a beautiful room. I feel like I should have worn my tuxedo. But I'm Mark Colon. I'm the Director of Public Engagement at NTIA with a focus on the internet suite of programs called Internet for All. President Biden made a promise on the campaign trail that he would bring, his administration would bring affordable, reliable, high-speed internet to everyone in America, every home and business in America, and once and for all close the digital divide. The administration put their money where their mouth is in putting $65 billion into the bipartisan infrastructure law to achieve that. And NTIA has not been, historically, we work on a lot of very important programs like access to radio spectrum and the like, but we haven't been a big grant-making organization. But up here, you see between the FCC and NTIA, about 62 of the $65 billion in grants that'll be awarded over the next few years, as well as the ACP subsidy program. And I call it social justice for the long haul, right? This is, as was alluded to, there's no one size fits all for each community. It's not just access, but it's adoption of these programs and how people can really get online in a useful way to improve their lives. And that's going to be a really difficult job. We're working hard at it. And we hope to answer some questions today.
Thank you. As he said, my name is Candelaria Reardon. I am a former legislator from Indiana and former NALEO chair. So I have worked with a lot of these faces here in the room. It's really nice to see all the advocates here doing the work, the important work that we are undertaking at the Department of Commerce to close the digital divide. as Mark said, it's important work, and it's important that we engage as a community. This is a unique opportunity for us, and so whatever we can do to spread the word about this engagement, it's really, really important. It is the rural electrification program of our generation, and so we really have to look at it that way. It's an opportunity. So thank you for having us.
Good afternoon. I'm trying to figure out, since I got into this room, how I feel about today. As someone that I think was formerly at HTTP, and I think is a room full of, I think, wonderful people. First, I think I want to say congrats to Julian and Brent and Elaine and Jonathan's here and Chris, Dario, who designed all of this. I think that the Digital Inclusion Summit really started as a labor of love. You know, I really got sick of being asked the question or going into rooms and people saying, well, we don't know any Latino engineers, or we don't know any Latino digital inclusion advocates that really understand policy and the impact that it has on communities. And I was like, well, you know, there was a moment where I was like, is that true? Like, I began to kind of doubt myself. Like, is that something that I think we really need to work on? But I think the more that I think I was steeped in this kind of wonderful kind of DC community and across the country, I realized that no, that is absolutely a myth, right? And I was like, well, if I know so many incredible advocates, I know that they exist and that they're out there. So this really was a meeting place to bring all of those voices together so that we can continue to kind of advocate for, I think, not only lift up the leadership of the multicultural policy advocates that we know are in the room and across the country, but also I think to elevate our voices because in this moment we really are the most impacted communities, multicultural communities. So thank you guys for having us. Thank you for this beautiful in-person summit. And like Chris said, my name is Alejandro Roark and I'm the chief of the Consumer and Government Affairs Bureau at the Federal Communications Commission. So it's a big bureau, and we have an office where we do our Office of Native Affairs. We have our Disability Rights Office. We have our Intergovernmental Affairs Office. And we also produce a lot of the consumer policy that comes out of the Federal Communications Commission through our Consumer Policy Division and our Disability Rights Office. So very happy to be here today to talk about how we can leverage this moment to really, I think, build an inclusive tech future where everyone, I think, is valued, acknowledged, and has the tools that they need to succeed. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those intros. I know this is one of the last agenda items for the summit, but I'm glad that we have such great experts up on the stage to sort of help us close out the summit. But just starting with the first question, let's level set the stage for a little bit. You know, help us understand what's at stake, aside from obviously the need for that physical infrastructure, like the fiber networks that need to go underground. You know, what have we learned about the digital divide so far, and the strategies that we need to be investing in, really focusing on? And maybe we can start reverse order for this question. Alejandro, I'd love to start with you. Yeah.
Sure. Back to me. So I think that what is really important, and what I consistently kind of share with folks, especially I think rooms full of kind of multicultural folks or Latino folks, is that the digital divide is an acutely Latino issue. Right? When you think about those that are the least connected, the least likely to have at-home internet access, we see that it's Latino communities, it's Black communities, it's tribal communities. We are the ones that are most affected with the digital divide and the negative impacts associated with that divide. So, you know, what I tell people is, if there is ever anywhere that there is a strategy that claims to bridge the digital divide, and we are not at the table, if it's not being informed by people that look like us, that sound like us, that understand our communities and the unique compounding barriers that we face to access, then we really should be skeptical, right? And so I think that in this moment, I feel really fortunate to be a part of this kind of ecosystem, because for the first time, I think in our country's history, we really are rooting all of our kind of infrastructure efforts, affordability efforts in digital equity, right? Everything that we're doing is through that lens and with that lens. And so I think that it's a really incredible moment for all of us to engage. So I would just kind of lay that foundation there, right? This is an issue that affects us And everything that we are doing, hopefully, is developing strategies with representational leadership. Everybody on this panel, I think this is the on the road crew. We've been in North Carolina. I'm always on the road with Mara and Mark, so they're good people. But yeah, so I think that there's definitely, I think this is a unique moment where everybody on the table and making decisions really, I think, uniquely understands the barriers to access and adoption at the community level.
Is there anything else that Mark or Mara you'd like to add to that? Sort of, how do we meet this moment? What have we learned about the digital divide so far?
So the one thing that I would say is we have tried this before, right? There have been grant programs before, billions of dollars allocated by Congress, by state and local governments to close the digital divide, right? And one of the things we seem to have learned is that, without, as Alejandro was alluding to, without hearing from the people in the community that are going to be affected, that we will not close the digital divide. The money will go to the same sort of players, right? And they'll do the economic calculus, and the money won't flow to our communities, right? So the good news is that right in the bipartisan infrastructure law, there are requirements for the money's going to be administered by the states and the territories. And the law requires those states and territories to engage with the community, with key stakeholders, and to do what we call local coordination, meaning that the state can't just make a plan, decide where the money will go, but they have to get input from the municipalities, from your city, from your town, from your village, right? So the states and the territories are in the process of putting together their plans for the two largest of the programs right now. We will not accept those plans if they don't show us evidence of how they engaged key stakeholders, right? How they engaged the municipalities, what comments and what suggestions they adopted into their plan that they got, and what they didn't, and why not. So we, NTIA, included additional, stronger requirements for engagement in our notice of funding opportunity. And so the only part that's missing from that equation then is you, right? Is that kind of like the highway's been opened, and we have to choose to get on and to participate and to engage. And we can talk a little bit about that and ways to do that.
I just wanted to add, when you talked about what are the things that we've learned, I think that one of the things that we've learned sort of anecdotally in our travels across the country, and particularly visiting programs and communities where we're pushing engagement, one of the things that we've learned obviously is that Latinos are the lowest adopters of home internet, but the highest adopters of mobile technology. So one of the things is that it's not always about access. It's oftentimes about digital skills. And some of the communities that we visited have told us that once people are skilled, they get classes, they go take digital skilling classes, then they adopt. It wasn't about access necessarily, but it's about seeing the value proposition that is the internet and the world that it opens up for people. And so when we focus, we have to focus obviously on access and make sure every community has access. But one of the things that drives access, that drives adoption, is digital skills. So those are the things that we should be thinking about.
Yeah. When it comes to digital skills, there is a story that I like to tell all the time. I've been trying to get my mom to use online banking apps for years now. And just because she has a smartphone and can do a bunch of stuff on it doesn't mean that she automatically knows how to navigate different tools that she's not aware of, right? So that digital skills development, that intentional and deliberate attention to it really matters in making sure that our communities can adopt these tools and participate in our economy and society. This actually leads nicely into the second question that I had prepared, which was, are there issues specific to Latino and Hispanic communities that the FCC and NTIA are aware of and are working on? For example, for me, I come from an Asian American household as a Korean American, and So the topic of cultural competence and language accessibility of things like digital skill building opportunities always comes up when it comes to my community. So just want to hear from the FCC and NTIA about, are there things that you're aware of that our Latino and Hispanic communities face when it comes to the digital divide?
Sure. The one thing that I will mention is the covered population designation in the legislation and in our outreach. In terms of what the NTIA has done for in terms of engaging the Latino community. Well, Mara and I are here, but in the legislation, it identified 7 or 8 different types of covered populations. And those are populations where we have to make an extra effort to reach out and to reach. And we had the 2 largest programs, BEAD and Digital Equity, were opt-in programs. So the states and the territories had to choose to opt in. And being a cynical New Yorker, coming from politics, I was almost certain that we were going to have at least a couple of governors who wanted to play politics with the digital equity program and make a statement about why they wouldn't opt in. But we got all 56 of them to opt in. And so I think that was done through working in partnership with groups like Hispanic Federation, groups like LULAC, and Unidos and HTTP. I remember actually having a conversation with Julian right as we were coming down to the wire. There was a hard deadline for the states to accept the money or not, and some of the biggest states like Florida, Texas hadn't yet opted in. And I remember calling and sort of strategizing on how we needed to, what we could do to sort of put some pressure on the state legislators and the governor's office to get those organizations to opt in. So at the national level, we're working very closely with the organizations that that represent the covered populations. But then the last thing that kind of, I think, made it really helpful, and folks should keep this in mind, is that when you hear digital equity and covered populations, you think immediately of equal opportunity, and you think of communities of color. The covered populations means that groups that have been historically left out of access to high-speed internet, right, and to training and to skills, right? So that includes veterans groups, right? Veterans, that includes seniors, and that includes rural residents, as well as communities of color and low-income communities, right? That's a powerful, powerful coalition, and we actually were able to use that in the where those states that may have been holdouts by that may have wanted to make an issue of not giving special money to special populations. Well, if those special populations include seniors and veterans, that's a lot of voters. And as we know, but sometimes isn't out there in the general population, the stereotype is that those groups aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, right? When folks think of veterans or think of seniors or think of rural residents, they don't necessarily think of Latinos or African Americans, but we know that there are many people in our community that fit 2 or more of those categories, right? So that's a powerful coalition, but it's also a message to us that even within our communities, there are distinct groups that need distinct types of services, like the Latino veterans, right? So I guess that's how I would answer that.
So I would say, as we think about kind of digital equity and what the FCC specifically is doing, what we've heard as we've been on the road, what we've heard today is not just about access to physical infrastructure, right? It's about digital skills, it's about ensuring that it's affordable. It's ensuring that we know how to be safe once we are online. The internet, I think, democratizes opportunity in a way that no other tool has been able to do in the past. And the only way that we can increase economic opportunity, education opportunity, healthcare opportunity, right, is to ensure that we are all connected. At the FCC, part of what digital equity in practice looks like is that, number one, we're working to ensure that the internet is fast, open, and fair for everyone. We are working to ensure that we have the nation's most accurate broadband maps in history, right? So that we know exactly where broadband is and broadband isn't. In the past, internet service providers were able to just say, hey, we cover all of these places. And we were like, great, thank you. You guys are awesome. But now, because of our new kind of like national broadband maps that we all have access to, we can put in our address, we can put in our zip code, and we can say, actually, this is my house. And it says that I'm getting this type of service or this kind of speed, but I've tried to sign up, or I'm a current customer and this is not my experience. And within that same map, you can file a challenge and say, hey, that's not my experience, right? So it went from being these maps that were kind of industry insider maps to now being all of our maps, right? We're also, I think, working to ensure that the internet is affordable through the Affordable Connectivity Program, which we know is the number one most cited barrier, again, across all of our covered populations, as kind of Mark said. It's not that we really love doing our homework on cell phones and fast food restaurant parking lot. It's that the price of internet has really kept a lot of our communities offline. It means that we are also working to ensure that we are developing model rules and policies to prevent and eliminate digital discrimination. That's something that, I've been on the road having listening sessions. We were in New York when Brett was there. What I just found out is that was a historic flood and rainfall. It wasn't just normal rainfall. So I was literally like praying, like, please make sure all the speakers get here. And, being in community, right? And kind of being there, experiencing everything, you're able to kind of really understand that when we say that this community has infrastructure challenges, it's not just infrastructure challenges, it's that the roads were literally flooded. Cars were floating down the street, right? So that speaks to the infrastructure in New York, which Mark, you're so kind of familiar with. And to be in there in that community to really kind of understand, right? If this is the type of infrastructure that they're working with, then you can really kind of understand how layering other types of infrastructure impact the experience of the community that lives there. And, and I think kind of close and personal to me is that in my bureau is that the FCC has an inclusive and accessible stakeholder engagement process. So the agency is able to put forward, policy that extends our country's telecommunication resources to everyone, everywhere. So it really is, some people say, a three-legged stool. I think we know that there's way more legs that we need to ensure that all of us have the support necessary to get connected, to afford to be connected, to understand how to be connected, and to really harness the opportunity that's available. So those are some of the things that I think I've learned and noticed over the years. And I think that, again, in this moment, we really have an all-of-government approach to ensure that we are addressing all of those barriers.
I would just add that, we all know that culturally competent programs improve outcomes, right? They improve outcomes, they build trust. We need to ensure that is what we're doing. It is the difference between building with the community or building for the community. And so that's what we have to do, build with the community. And that's what we attempt to do with all of the programs that we're involved in.
Thank you for those insights. And Mark, I love that you brought in the topic of covered populations, because this is something that the Department of Education has been trying to emphasize to our stakeholders, our district leaders, our higher ed institution leaders, that those 8 covered populations, even though students and educators aren't covered, aren't mentioned explicitly, they overlap with every single one of them, right? There's students with disabilities. There are veterans in our higher ed systems. Our community college systems have so many adult learners that overlap each of the 8 covered populations. So the Department of Education has been trying to do our part to say, hey, as your states are building these BEAD plans, these digital equity plans, you have a role to play in joining that table to advocate for the needs of students furthest from opportunity. So thank you for emphasizing that the NTIA is looking for how states are strategizing around the needs of those covered populations. So we talked a little bit about what each of our agencies are doing to respond to the needs that we're seeing out there in the field. But something that we've been also trying to emphasize is that it can't be just one sector leading the charge when it comes to closing the digital access divide, right? It has to be a multi-sector, collaborative approach to all of this. So I'd love to get your insights on what's the role of some of these other sectors, including industry, civil society, community anchor institutions, as well as local and state governments in closing the digital access divide. What can they do to sort of contribute to the work that's going around the country?
Well, I would just start out by saying this is the people in this room, right? The people in this room are here to educate themselves and to continue to push forward with closing the digital divide. And I think that we are we have a very unique opportunity here. And people in this room understand what it is to march and lobby and get legislation passed. And the unique thing about the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the NOFO that came out of that, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, is that it requires stakeholder engagement. That means you, that means me, it means all of America is engaged in this process. And it doesn't only say, oh, well, collect some information. It actually requires states to basically show their papers and say, this is what I've done to engage these 7 covered populations. This is what I've done. This is why this is included in the state program. And so this opportunity, we know that is very unique. You all know that when legislation is often passed at the federal level, we're not asked how it's going to be implemented, are we? We're not. And so that's what's so amazing about this is they're saying, we want your input. We want you to put your address into the FCC maps and say, hey, that's not the speed with which I receive internet. We want you to be engaged in the process. And I think that this is an opportunity that this is a once in a generation opportunity. And if we don't take advantage of it, our communities are going to stay behind and be left behind. So I think that that's really the most important thing is being at the table, being engaged.
And I guess in terms of other stakeholder groups, when I started, we had a limited staff. I think NTIA, I heard the assistant secretary say, we've hired a third of the agency in the year since when I first started. 1/3 of if anybody knows anything about hiring in the federal government, you'd know that that's probably in the Guinness Book of World Records. That's got to be some kind of record. So we had to sort of figure out where we were going to allocate our resources and our time. And I said to the assistant secretary, I said, and he comes from the industry, he knows this too, is that, the industry has people on staff, right? They have whole offices, right, of intergovernmental affairs, public relations, right? Some of those offices do really good community work, right? And other offices are there to advocate before the government, right, in the interest of the industry. Now, there may be a divergence or the interests of the community and the industry may come together or they may not, right? But those people, so we decided, we made a conscious choice to reach out to groups like the groups that are here right now and to start with groups that represent those covered populations, like the AARP with seniors. I remember going to, given as we're kind of like the road show, as Alejandro said, I remember going to the Volunteers of America Associates, BOAA, and speaking on a housing and broadband panel, and it was packed. People had come from all over the country. This was a really vibrant, robust, active organization. So we feel that sort of arming those folks with the right information and pointing them in the right directions, right? Like we provide resources. We've on our webpage, we've provided one web page where you can go click on your state and find contact information for your state broadband office, contact information for your NTIA federal program officer in your state, and also when your state has posted their plans for public comment. We realize that this is social justice for the long haul, right? It's not going to be done overnight. People kind of like I always thought of internet service in a sort of a bifurcated way, right? You either have it or you don't, right? And if you have it, there are people that don't, but you have it for now. And if you have it, it works or it doesn't, right? But this is really the opportunity to make sure that everyone has it. And we know that we are in that long haul. We are going to, and we do interact and engage with the telecom companies, the internet service providers. They're all key players. And as Alejandro alluded to before, the president has talked a lot about a whole of government efforts to address kind of like these long-standing, really difficult problems that the country still faces. Well, for this effort, for the broadband effort, he said we need a whole of America effort, right? So the way, there's no plan that's going to result in a perfect solution, but the more of those different sectors that we can involve in a positive way, and we can hold their feet to the fire, right? The better result that we're going to have at the end.
And shameless plug, one thing that all of these sectors can do immediately is go to onlineforall.org and sign up to be a supporting organization and join the coalition of over 370 organizations that are committed to spreading awareness of the ACP and helping families sign up. So if there's anyone thinking about how they can contribute to this moment, onlineforall.org, onlineforall.org. I see that we have 5 minutes left, so I want to jump to my last question, which is, what's your vision? What are your hopes around the future of digital equity? When we're on the stage 5 years from now, what do you hope to see how the nation has changed in a positive direction? And how close do you think we are to achieving that vision? Yeah.
I would like to see an internet that is that reflects our community. I'd like to see an internet. The expansion of our internet. I'd like to see our community cutting the fiber, splicing the fiber. I'd like to see our community building the infrastructure. I'd like to see our community protecting that infrastructure. We know there is going to be a shortage of people for this deployment. We already know what jobs we're going to be short of. It's our responsibility as a community to educate the workforce of tomorrow, today. So that's what I'd like. And we do have a workforce guide on internetforall.gov. So please visit our website as well, internetforall.gov. We have a workforce planning guide there for you.
Alejandro?
I think that's a big question. And 5 years, I think, is a short kind of time horizon. I think in 5 years, we'll hopefully see a lot of shovels in the ground. We'll start seeing a lot of the infrastructure being deployed. But I think shorter term, within that kind of 5-year time, I really would love to see the Affordable Connectivity Program continue, right? And connect more households. I'm definitely, I think all of us right in this room have been so invested and recognized early on that the Affordable Connectivity Program is so important to ensuring that our communities have just the basic opportunity to be able to have internet subscription, whether at home or on the go. And so as of, this year, it's 21 million households that are now enrolled in the program. Those are households in urban communities, rural communities, across tribal lands. We established the FCC's first federal grant program. So now we have, outreach partners in every state and territory across the country, except for one. But they had tornado, hurricane issues. We're working with them. But it's one of those things where it's like that program really is working. It really is, I think, solving the number one most cited barrier. And so I really want to see us kind of turbocharge that. We know that even though 20 million is a really big number, there's still a lot of households out there that don't know about the program or need support to get through the application process or to select a provider and a plan that meets their household needs and their long-term budget, right? And I think that I would love to see that every community serving organization that does not currently have a digital equity strategy plan or program to develop one. Because at this point, whether you're helping people sign up for other government programs, whether it's a nutrition program, whether it's a whatever it is that you are kind of working with, I think vulnerable populations at the community level, all of us should have a digital equity strategy and program to ensure that everybody is connected. Because what we saw during COVID was so many programs, government services really migrate online. And what we're seeing now is that they're not coming back like they used to be. They're staying online. And so I think Antonio Tijerino, who's a part of HCTP, has said at one time, we're either on the verge of the digital divide becoming a digital cliff, right? Or we really are leveraging this moment to transform the way that we all connect to each other and to our communities and to our government. And so that really requires all of us to lean in, to speak up, because we've been fighting to be at the table for a really long time. And now, as Mark and Mara have said, it's not a nice to have, we would kind of like to have your opinion. It is a requirement that at the state level, they are talking to us. They want to talk to us. There's federal program officers at the state level for NTIA. If you can't get through your state broadband office, talk to the program officer from NTIA. We need and want your perspective, and we want you to continue to be engaged so that, at the 5-year mark, we really have an entire kind of pipeline of folks that have really taken this moment and leaned in so that we can, again, just continue to propel their leadership forward.
I would say I'd give you 2 examples that were so unique, they were inspiring in our travels, that I would hope are universal. They're not unusual. And so we've been to Miami a couple of times for a couple of different conferences. It's a very dynamic location in terms of this space, the broadband technology, high-tech space. And the first experience was going to visit the largest Haitian Roman Catholic church if not in the country, then in Florida, right? And the priest welcomed us, took us around, and took us to visit a seniors digital literacy class that was given for free twice a day. 80 seniors, morning and evening, twice a day, 4 times a week, came and got trained in digital literacy skills. And the story he told us, the director of the program, who gave it in Creole and in English, told us that there was a man who was a maintenance worker that was part of the program, that was part of the church. And he was a maintenance worker for a large box store, like Costco or something. And the Costco had gone online in terms of the maintenance workers having to enter the rooms that they had cleaned, that they had finished. And he couldn't do that. He didn't have the ability to get online to know, and he lost his job, took the class, and got his job back. The other thing that I would like to see universally is and I'm going to forget the name of the school. Is Miami-Dade? What was the college we went to? Miami-Dade College.
Survived a tsunami.
Survived a tsunami. They have, and we weren't expecting this, we went down to visit, was there a conference there, Mara?
Latinos in Society program.
Oh, Aspen Latinos in Society program. They were actually kicking off, launching their digital principles for Latino communities. We brought the assistant secretary there to give the keynote speech. But before that, we took him to visit the Miami-Dade College Artificial Intelligence Learning Center. And it was 90% driven by the young people. They showed us I don't even know what to call them, the automatons on the screen where you would go to the drivers, to the motor vehicles department, and they could re-register you, right? This young person had developed this program. They had a robot. I have great pictures of Mara interacting with the robot and using the glasses, what do they call those? Virtual reality, VR glasses and all, right? And these were all programs and utilities that had been developed by the students. They have a certificate program in AI that is soon going to be a degree program. And this was really cutting edge, and it was all Hispanic, right? I want to see those programs that are cutting edge. I want to see our people having the ability, the resources, the access. We know they have the talent, right? But they just need the opportunity and the resources. So that's what I hope to see in 5 years from now.
You know, being from the Department of Ed, I think that's a perfect way to close our panel. I love hearing those student stories, and I agree with you. 5 years from now, I hope that becomes the norm where we see that student agency with the digital technologies more ubiquitous across the country. So I look forward to working closely with the FCC and NTIA to realize that vision. Let's give our panelists another round of applause for their expertise. And thank you all for your participation in this session.